Hello, hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers Sunday Sermon. This is 4S. I'm David Johnson and joined by Mac Attack. Let's get started. How you doing, Mac?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Uh, Not doing great, but I'm here. I want to try to stay uh, in good spirits today. Um, So we've got we had an interesting conversation last week, and I am told that I was misunderstanding what you were saying, um, which is which I do not doubt at all. Um, so I can make at least one promise today: we will not mention Aeon Hersey Ali. That's the last of it. We will never speak of it again. Um, and then secondly, we want to spend some time in definitions and defining terms so that we uh, are on the same page, or at least so that we understand and the audience understands that we're not on the same page. But to proceed with a conversation like this, believing wrongly that we're on the same page, makes for an unproductive conversation. So I want to see if we can align our pages so that we can have a productive discussion. Anything that you want to say before we get started? Because I have a few things that I want to say by way of introduction.
Yeah, it's unavoidable to have a conversation with any person and not have it be that the other person either doesn't hear what you're saying the way you want them to hear it. Like I see that all the time on the boards. I see people saying, "Oh, you said this," and I have to try and remember when it was that I said something because pretty sure some of the things I get accused of saying I don't say like 99% of them. One thing that I wanted to talk address real fast that I saw someone said was that last week apparently I said that I had special access to the mind of God. I never said that anywhere. I would never think of saying anything like that. But obviously they got it from somewhere. They said, well, in terms of clarification, I didn't say that. I don't believe that I have special access to God's mind in the sense of like I can know what God is thinking right now in terms of whoever uh, specifically. So that's just one way in which I can't control for, or no one really, in the sense that we wish. We can't control how people take what we say. We can only do our best and then hope for the best. Yeah, and yeah, that's just one thing I wanted to get out there.
Yeah, well, I think that a large dose of philosophical charity has to be slathered across all such conversations because what people are doing is they're taking you as you have presented yourself over time and trying to smooth it out. And, they have a narrative about what they think you think based on things that you said that, maybe you didn't say in the last show and maybe that you never said directly, but is a kind of a logical leap to what they think you mean. It's kind of like when you tell me that I think that I'm my own God, and I don't believe that, and I tell you every time I never said that. But you believe that the logical conclusion of things that I have said lead to that conclusion. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to say, well, you never said it, and so they're wrong for coming to
Well,
that
I can
conclusion.
I can say that
I've never said a lot of things that you've accused me of saying.
well I'm just saying that when someone says, "Oh, you said this," well, they could, the best option, the better option would be to say, "This is what I think you're saying. Is this what you're saying?" As opposed to saying, "Oh, they're saying for sure that they know what is in God's mind, and that means they're part of a cult or something like that." And I'm like, I never said anything like that.
I,
But if,
I
again, like I said, like if someone wants to make those logical leaps, as you call them, then uh, the best I can do is say, "Hey, you've got that part wrong." If they choose to take it, great. If they don't, then that's unfortunate, but that's
right.
how it is.
The same as when I say I don't believe that I am a god.
I,
So,
I again, that's another thing I could say. I never said you were a god,
yeah,
but
but you have said many times that I am. Um, yeah, we could get lost there, and I suspect that maybe the first few comments would be about that. But this is a thing that everybody does. It's a part of communication, and I'm not trying to harsh on one individual, but you can't. I mean, you make those logical leaps about people that you have communications with on the board, and so it's not exactly a fair thing to say. Well, I never said X simply because you didn't say the exact words. You said something that leads someone to believe that, and I would agree with you fully that the thing to do is to say, it seems to me that what you're saying is X. Is that correct? And then accept the answer that you're given
right.
with that.
But the culture on the boards is for someone to say, "Oh, I think this is what he's saying," and then this entire essay comes about, and it's like it's being strung out to be a whole like thesis on what I believe based on false premises, and then a conclusion is somehow drawn. And I'm wondering, okay, if you're not sure about what I believe, how is it that you're able to come up with a theory of it? Like, I
So
don't think that's just intellectually right
let's
to do.
let's kind of set that aside because that's a thing that's going to be ongoing. It's just ongoing. It's part of communicating with people, whether you're on a discussion board or not. And hopefully, the people within a community can learn how to communicate more effectively and uh, with more philosophical charity. So that I think that at the end of the day, that's going to be the order of the day because we're always going to we have our own biases. We have heard specific things that people have said, and we've heard them a certain way, and we hear what they say next, and it seems to reinforce the thing that we already believe. And you have to kind of step back from time to time and say, okay, this person insists that that's not what they're saying. So I need to strive harder to understand what they're saying. So you need to ask another question. And um, I just think that that's the way towards civility. But I did not. We've got a hard stop, so I don't want to spend too much time on discussion etiquette. Try to love each other and treat each other with integrity and philosophical charity. We'll be fine. So that said, let's talk a little bit about Christianity. So one of the things I wanted to say right off the bat is I don't want to get lost in terms like real Christianity, true Christianity. I don't even want to get lost in terms like Orthodox Christianity, although I think that this discussion might touch on orthodoxy. And the reason I don't is because it adds a qualifier to Christianity that I don't think is justified. Christianity is, at least in my mind, binary. You're a Christian or you're not a Christian. You're not a Christian at certain degrees. You're not a 50% Christian. You're 100% Christian or you're 100% not Christian. And I'm not sure that there is an option for some kind of gradient. And so when we say things like, "Oh, real Christianity," um, when I do, what I'm trying to address is what I am hearing other people say that sounds like Christianity uh, has some type of gradient, and that you can be a kind of a Christian, but not fully a Christian. But the real Christians, the full Christians, they're this way as opposed to those other people. And I just, for me, real Christianity is otherwise known as Christianity. And the same is true with Orthodoxy, but to a lesser extent and in a different way. Uh, I'm I'm not interested in debating Orthodox Christianity because what Orthodox actually means is the accepted norm. Some Christians like to use Orthodox to mean original. So the earliest Christianity, that's Orthodox. But in fact, Orthodox doesn't really mean that. It has to do with what has been accepted as a thing, and it's not just a matter of religion. You talk about Orthodox capitalism, um, that sort of thing. So people mean different things when they use these words, but once again, to me, it feels like a qualifier. You have a belief, but it's not an orthodox belief. And for me, I'm more interested in you're a Christian or you're not a Christian. And if you're not a Christian, I don't really care what your beliefs are because they don't really have to do with Christianity. If you are a Christian, then I do care what your beliefs are because that's something that is within the realm of what Christians can believe and still be Christians, and so we have to address that. So that's kind of where I am there. I am interested in understanding uh, at least what you think of as Christianity. And I'm interested in a conversation of what Christianity is in actual and what it is to people individually. Because once again, if we can minimize the talking past each other, that would be helpful. So I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that opening so that we can kind of feel our way to where to dig in first.
So you're asking for the definition of Christian? Like,
Sure,
what
we
is it?
could.
Like,
Sure,
okay,
we
all
can
right,
start there.
all right, sure. So, like, just a succinct one sentence definition for someone who's a Christian is it's a person who is looking to Jesus Christ alone for salvation. So that means if someone is looking to themselves, their moral ability, their moral capability, they're looking to other religions, other frameworks, other philosophies. They're looking to anyone else but Christ alone for salvation, for redemption, for uh, righteousness, for anything else, then that person is not a Christian. So last week we were talking about Unitarians, and I never got a chance to point out that for someone who's a Unitarian, uh, that Unitarianism itself doesn't solve the problem that it's trying to solve, because anyone who's a Unitarian says, well, we can't just have it be one way of you can't say as a Christian that Christ is the only way uh, for salvation. And salvation, that's a term that can be unpacked later on. But a Unitarian wants it to be that uh, atheism is valid, Hinduism is valid, Buddhism is valid. All these are valid expressions of the human conscience, and they want it to all fit together. So when they say they're a Christian, well, they're not fitting that definition I just gave of someone who is looking to Christ alone for salvation. And in another sense, they're not solving the problem, because at the end of the day, these Unitarian churches, I mean, the fact that they're called churches kind of already shows that they're vying for supremacy. So it's not like a Unitarian mosque or a Unitarian synagogue, it's a Unitarian church. And the fact that it used to be a Christian denomination, and it's kind of still is, it doesn't solve that problem. So, based on that definition of someone who looks to Christ alone for salvation, uh, based on that, anyone who says I am fully all in with Unitarianism, they are not a Christian in that sense, because they're in some way or form looking to themselves to be their own savior, to be their own master, and by doing that, they're not uh, following Christ.
Okay, let me just say this about Unitarians, and I don't want to go too many rounds on this because this feels like a rabbit hole too. But what I was trying to say is I spent several months uh, worshiping exclusively at a Unitarian church. So part of my path went through Unitarian Universalism. Um, and I can tell you that there is, just like every denomination, there's a difference between what is in some statement of faith about a denomination and what people actually think within that denomination. And so uh, there are absolutely Unitarians, especially Unitarian preachers. They tend to be extremely ecumenical. So that is something that you will find a lot. But also, you will find people who are Jesus exclusivists in Unitarian churches. There are lots of reasons that people leave a more fundamentalist church and go to a Unitarian church. And it is not, in my experience, because they want to give up on Jesus exclusivism. Some of them might, but others don't. So what the Unitarian church becomes is a haven for people with all kinds of disparate beliefs who manage to worship there. It's not that they hold to a Unitarian quote unquote belief. So a lot of Unitarians, people who identify as Unitarians, are in fact Jesus exclusivists, and to just make a blanket statement that they're not because that's what it says in the Unitarian Charter is just not true. It's like saying that every Southern Baptist is against women preachers because it says so in the Charter. Not true at all.
Well, I'm only going by what's like I can only go by what's being like put out. So if there's a definition for Unitarian, if someone says I'm a Unitarian, then that has to have a meaning. That has to have, like, what does that mean? So you're saying there are Christians who have orthodox beliefs, but they're part of Unitarian uh, congregations. And for me,
Absolutely.
I've been trying to wrap my head around how someone can have orthodox beliefs, and like I'm sure it's possible, like, but that person has to have lots of dissonance, because in one
Do
sense
you
you
accept
believe,
that a person can be a Southern
well,
Baptist and be in favor of women preachers?
I'll get to that in a second. But back to how someone can say, okay, I believe that Christ is the only way to salvation. I believe that no one can have peace and reconciliation with God except through faith in Christ. But at the same time, you're standing in the same room praying to the spirit of life next to a Buddhist, or praying to Allah next to a Muslim, and you think that what they're doing is valid. I can't understand how that person does not uh, unravel at the end of the day, because they're doing what they're doing goes against what they profess they believe. So that's something
You're
that's,
making some judgments about
well,
what people are thinking when they're in that situation, and
I
I
I just said I don't know what they're thinking. So if I ever met this person that I don't think exists, but if I met them, I would
I
want to
existed.
know.
Do I
Well,
not exist?
but
I spent
no,
months in a Unitarian church.
but you weren't. You're saying you're a Jesus exclusivist, um, while you were praying to other deities. I
I
don't
never
understand.
pray. Hang on, I never prayed to other deities.
So, okay, this is becoming a rabbit hole, but I again, I'm just generally trying to understand because I don't understand, and and how someone can say, okay, this is what I believe, but at the same time, you're congregating. I believe what is found in the Bible. I believe Christ is the only way for salvation, but you're alongside other people who you believe are not going to heaven, and you're telling them that they're fine. I either you don't
Not
believe.
everyone in UU has to believe in heaven. This is what I'm telling you.
Well,
You're
so then
making some
no, it's
serious assumptions
so this
about
is why
what
this
people
conversation is taking place.
believe.
I'm not making a I'm saying, like, and please, whoever's listening, understand what I'm saying. I'm saying you can't have it both ways, but you're trying to say that it's both ways. I can't. Either you're not committed to Christian Orthodox beliefs, or you're like having it. You're picking and choosing. You're saying, I this part of Christianity, I want that part about tolerance and respect and forgiveness and redemption, but that other part about how God is going to judge people through Christ on the final day, I don't think that's true. I'm going to leave that out. And then you're going to congregate and worship alongside other people who worship other gods and say that you're still part of the same community. I don't understand how that works itself out. If someone's
There are
out
lots
there's
of
a
people in
Unitarian,
there are
I
lots of
would
people
love
in
to
the
hear.
community where I live that I consider a part of my community that believe differently than me about a lot of things. So we can
Not
be in community with people
like a
without
spiritual
believing the
community.
same thing. Okay,
That's what I meant. I meant
okay,
spiritual
but
community, not
I'm just
like a
but
community
I don't
community.
see where that has to be different.
Well,
So I ask you specifically about Baptists and women preachers. I can cite statistics about Catholics and birth control, and we all know that the Pope is the ultimate authority there, at least human on Earth, and yet I believe the last statistic I saw was that more Catholics were in favor of birth control than not, and yet they are Catholics. Uh,
I, I,
they
I,
defy the Pope. They defy Orthodox teaching, and yet they are Catholics. You don't have to understand it.
well,
Uh,
I'm not saying I have to understand it. I'm just saying the hypothetical that you put forth doesn't make sense to me because it's not, you're trying to say someone can have it both ways, and I'm saying you can't have it both ways. You can't say one thing that's contradictory. You can't say Jesus is the only way to salvation and at the same time be part of a spiritual community where other people are saying there are many roads
yes, you
uh,
can.
to.
Yes, you
Yeah,
can.
you can outwardly, right? You can outwardly, but in the like inwardly, you're
It
you're
in
you're
your
living
own
in
church, in
contradiction.
your own church, whatever your church is, I can guarantee in your own church there are people who have heterodox views about a lot of things.
Right, but like that's
And you're
not the same thing.
yes, it is because you're in fellowship with them.
That's not the same thing because here we have someone who is part of, like, this is why I hope there's someone out there who can clear this up who's actually a Unitarian who fits this bill, because for
Well,
me,
you're
as I
talking to
understand it,
someone who
who was,
went
but you're
there
not
for
anymore. I'm talking
months.
about someone right now
Okay,
who's
so
a
you're talking about
Unitarian who
someone who
says,
has more authority
uh,
than I do. I am the closest to an authority that you know, apparently, and I'm telling you that I was a
well,
Unitarian for months.
yeah, I know, but you were on the way to atheism. You're deconverting while you were being a Unitarian. So that's what I'm saying. Like, when you have these conflicting ideas in your mind, and it's like you're trying to reconcile this, but you have this other contradictory idea that's that's fighting against the other one. What tends to happen is the one gets pushed out and the other one wins. In other words, you can't hold both of these in your mind at the same time. You can't say all my Muslim and Hindu and Buddhist friends are going to be just fine because they're good people who do good things, while at the same time you look at what Jesus said and say, okay, that's also true. Well, they can't both be true.
There are
Someone
people
has to
in
be
your
wrong.
church who believe that people outside of Jesus' traditions will be saved.
I've never met them if they're in my church.
Well, okay. I think there are probably a lot of people you've never met.
No,
Um,
I'm
but
speaking honestly, right?
maybe if
No,
you,
because you're
I'm
saying you're
speaking
proving
honestly too,
a
and maybe
claim.
what you need to do is listen to people's stories when they tell them, instead of making these kind of
No,
blanket
I
judgments
just
about what
said
people believe.
I just said if there's someone out there who does believe this, I would be interested to know how they work that out because you're saying you're the authority. Well, you're not a Unitarian. I would like to talk to a Unitarian right now who's in a Unitarian church, but they believe that Jesus Christ is the only way to salvation. Like, I would like to know what's going on. Like, you can't, is it like I don't know. That's why I'm saying I would like to know. That's me offering, extending an olive branch, saying it would be great to have this conversation. But you're telling me that I can't do that because I'm already prejudging, or I'm already
Well,
I'm
you
already
have
making
actually
a leap
prejudged. Now
ahead.
you can go back and not prejudge, but you have prejudged
Well,
pretty much
how?
every Unitarian because of some doctrine you found on a website. And I'm telling you
It's
that
their official website.
that is not how Unitarianism works in
If
practicality. And
if
in
you're
fact, I
right,
would go beyond that and say that's not how any denomination works in practicality, because people are a part of denominations for all kinds of reasons, and the least reason that they're a part of denomination is because of some doctrinal distinctive. People don't even know what their denomination's doctrinal distinctives are. That's not why they're there.
and if we're dealing with um, a topic in which someone says I'm a Christian, right? This topic is a is a topic that deals with definitions and people and how people self-identify. And I know like we live in a very relativistic culture where someone can say something and not mean what they mean. Like for me, if someone says I'm a Unitarian Universalist, then that means something. And I would like to know what it means for them, and that's not me being judgmental. So I'll say, okay, you're a Unitarian Universalist. What do you believe? And then I'll go to this page that I'm looking at where they have what we believe, and I'll go through. Okay, do you agree with all this? If they don't agree with all this, then that means that they're not the kind of Unitarian that they think that they are, and that's helpful for them. It will be helpful for them to have clarity on what it is that they actually say. Like it wouldn't be helpful for someone to say I'm a 7 foot tall white man if they're not a 7 foot tall white man. Like you take a mirror and you hold it up to them and you see you're actually 5'4" and you're actually Hispanic. You're not. That's what I'm saying. You're saying, oh, you can't do that because you know the mirror might be, and most people don't want to know. Most people don't know, and I don't think that's helpful even for the person. Like, why would you say I'm a Unitarian and then say like, I don't even care about reading the statement of beliefs? Like,
Okay,
do you hear what
let's
you're saying?
yeah. So let's move toward definitions. I'm actually doing something that I normally don't do, which is I'm taking notes and I am trying to make an organized list of things that you are saying that define Christianity. So Jesus exclusivism, clearly the first of them. Um, so, uh, what about atonement then? Because if you believe that one has to believe that Jesus is the exclusive way to salvation, then you also must believe that doctrines of salvation and atonement are important. Is that correct?
I would say they're important, but not necessarily perhaps in the way that you're thinking of. But what I'll say is, like, again, my definition isn't someone who is like you just gave a definition. I can't repeat it, but the definition I gave is someone who's looking to Christ alone for salvation. It's not
Okay.
Jesus exclusivism, because someone can be a Jesus exclusivist and still not be looking to him for salvation. They could say, yes, like how the Republican Party claims to be a Christian party, but they're not a Christian party. They claim to be so, but they're not. Someone can also do the same
Right.
thing.
So I have Jesus exclusivism, looking to Jesus for salvation. I got that.
alone
I
for
think we,
salvation.
yeah. Well, that's what exclusivism means. So I've got that, and
Not
so I'm trying to work on the salvation part because we have many different ideas of atonement from people who exclusively believe that salvation comes from Jesus. So let me ask about salvation for a moment. What is salvation?
salvation is redemption from there's three parts to this. First, the penalty of sin, that everyone has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and therefore God's justice is what everyone deserves. And so a Christian is someone who, through the death of Christ, has that penalty paid for because Christ took on that just punishment. There was a substitutionary atonement that was made for them. An atonement means a covering over of sin. It doesn't mean what most people give the modern meaning to. It just means that when God looks at a person who is trusting in Jesus, it means that he does not see that person's sins. He sees Jesus' righteousness. And then there's the second part of salvation, which means you're being saved from the power of sin presently. So when someone becomes a Christian, God, the Holy Spirit, immediately starts to work on their heart and starts to uh, reform them inwardly and outwardly in terms of their behavior, in terms of their outlook on life, in terms of what they prioritize. And finally, salvation is that final state in heaven where you're free from all sin, free from the presence of sin, and you're able to not have to sin anymore because Christians still do sin. Someone again said that, well, I said that Christians are perfect. Well, I never said Christians are perfect. Christians are being perfected in this life. And so salvation is a three-step, in a way to understand it systematically, it's a three-step process, if you want to call it that.
Okay.
There's the justification, free from the penalty of sin, sanctification, you're being perfected in this life day by day, and then glorification, final salvation, you're in heaven with Christ forever.
Okay. So it so that's salvation. Is it necessary for a Christian to understand salvation in that way? Could they not could they misunderstand salvation
Yes,
and
there's a
still
way
be
in which
saved?
people can misunderstand
Okay, tell me about that.
salvation and be not and be saved.
Yes,
You
and be
meant
saved.
like there's a way in which someone cannot articulate it the way I just did and still be saved
Well,
because
no,
again,
forget articulation.
well,
Just they don't understand it that way.
how can you give me an example of that?
Sure. A person believes that um, Jesus has become the exemplar of how uh, one reaches the divine. And so, if we take the advice of Jesus and walk the path of Jesus, then we too can reach that state of divinity and be moved beyond our current uh, uh, imperfect condition.
I would say that person does not understand Christianity because while it is true that Jesus is an example for us to emulate, how we draw close to God isn't by trying to be like him in the sense of I'm going to now I'm just gonna try and be as good as I can be so that God will accept me because that's the exact basis for why Jesus had to come to earth and live the life that he did. Because if a Christian believes that Jesus was sinless, which is another big thing, that's why doctrine is important, then you can't improve on what's perfect. So you have to look at the perfection. And so someone saying, I'm only going to look at Christ as an example, in a very big way, they have missed the big picture of what it means to be saved. Because in a sense, they're following Christ, but they're trying to be like him in their own strength. They're not relying on him. They're not relying on the gospel. They're not seeing that the gospel is good news, that it's an announcement that God has done something for sinners. God has done something that is great news, that is good news, that whoever believes in Christ has in the present acceptance with God. It's not merely that you're just trying to live up to God's standards. So someone who has that kind of view uh, is in a big way missing the most important part. It's like
Okay,
they're looking like half a painting.
I need a clearer statement than that, though. They're missing an important part. Got it. But are they a
Right.
Christian?
They're not. So here's the thing that I talked about last week briefly, is that there's no way for me to say like someone, there's a sense in which someone can have that view and still be saved.
That's what I
And
was
there's,
asking.
yeah, and I'm answering it.
Okay, well, you said
There's
no.
someone,
You said no initially, so that's
yeah, I
okay.
said, to me, if that's the only view that they have, but there's a sense in which someone can have that view and also have other views that, and the tendency in the human heart is to try and subvert the view that God is the one who does everything in salvation, and try and make it, I can do, like, right, like at least 10%, like the previous shows. Like someone says, well, I contribute some of it, right? Like I can try and improve on it. And it's like, if you're trying to add to God's salvation, you're actually subtracting from it. So someone who says uh, salvation is just about me trying to be like Jesus, in a very real way, they have not understood the gospel. Now, have they not fully? They've not fully understood it. Is there a situation where, if they're shown that they're not understanding it, that they could be like, oh, I see it now, then yeah. So it's not a question of like going around saying you're not saved, you're saved because you understand it. It's much more complicated than that. But in this situation, because you asked me a straightforward question, what is salvation, and there's that three step way of answering it. Now other traditions answer it in a different way, and they give more answers that look similar to what I just said, but they use different language. But there's a sense in which someone can believe and look to Christ alone for salvation and be saved. But if someone has a less than adequate view of salvation, then there's a strong chance that they are not saved.
Okay. Um, okay. I'm trying to process the answer because I'm trying to get these questions down to a yes or no in my mind anyway.
Well, it's not
So
a
if a person
like a yes or
if a
no.
well it kind of is, if a person believes the wrong things about salvation, I'm not talking about different wording choices. You know, we can throw your definition in an AI filter and tell it to say this in other words, and there are other words that it can say that mean the same thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a person that believes something different than what you said. That and the initial answer was no, and then it was maybe,
Well, no,
and
my
so
initial answer was, I would say that there's a strong chance. Like this is my final answer. I would say there's a strong chance that they are not a Christian because they don't understand salvation.
okay.
It's a strong chance. It's my answer.
So you're admitting though in that there's a possibility that they could be a Christian and you just don't know it.
Right, and they just don't have the right information, and they could really be redeemed and saved and on their way to heaven, but they've just misunderstood something that's, you know, they've just misunderstood it because they thought, like, yes, Jesus is an example, but they've made that the ultimate. They've made that the gospel.
Right.
But the gospel is not. That's not what the gospel is. The gospel isn't that Jesus is just an example that we follow with our, and we don't have to do like. It's not like I have in my mind a picture of someone who says, like, just try and be like Jesus, try to be more Christ-like, And usually people who say that usually don't look Christ-like at all. So that's just how I'm seeing it.
Okay, so most likely not a Christian.
Strong
Um,
chance. Strong chance.
okay, the strong chance they're not a Christian. All right. Um, now, what about sin? Because I know the word came up in your definition. I'm trying to listen, um, but I think I need some more color on sin. What does a person have to know, actually know propositionally about sin, uh, to be a Christian? Because
Well,
I know personally people who don't believe in a specific formulation of sin as if we were, as in we're born in iniquity somehow, and that we're born with a sin nature, and that we need, um, someone to overcome that sin nature for us. They believe pretty much like I do about the human animal. We're progressing through evolution, and we haven't reached our final state, whatever that final state is before the universe blows up. And so it's not so much that we are sinners as much as we are imperfect and incomplete people who are uh, broken in any number of ways, and that Jesus is here to heal our brokenness, and it has nothing to do with traditional formulations of sin. Now, I'm guessing that you would say that that person is not a Christian, but I would like to hear it from you. So tell me how sin fits into this.
I again, I would be hard pressed to, I don't know, like, because I've talked to lots of people, and I know that's like, oh, that's subjective, and there's no way to. But for you to know about sin, you have to see yourself as a sinner. Now, if you don't see yourself as a sinner, and you're just, like, you're saying, like, all this is just I'm just a victim of circumstance and whatever, and like, following Jesus just helps me to be a little bit better, uh, a little bit nicer to my wife and my kids, then in a very real sense, you still haven't understood the essence of what it means, that Christ died on the cross for sinners, and that's why in churches, well, it's kind of going out of style. The cross has always been the center, because there is where you see God's justice, God's wrath against sin, His judicial commitment to end evil is there displayed on the cross. And also, you see God's love in that He did it so that sinners would be reconciled with Him, so that the judgment that is due to a sinner who has sinned and sins every day, is that penalty is now gone. Now, if I'm understanding you correctly, someone who says, I don't believe sin exists, is also saying that I don't believe, uh like, they're saying, like, what Jesus did on the cross was simply just, like, the formulation that I've seen usually from liberal Christians, like Rainbow Peter, were like, they were just saying that Jesus' death was just an unfortunate occurrence, that it just happened out of happenstance. It just happened, because people are just people. It was unfortunate. God never really wanted it to happen, but the scriptures, the Bible teaches that it happened because God needed to find a way to deal with sin without destroying sinners. And so I don't even think I'm answering this question adequately, but I'm saying, like, if someone does not think of sin, especially their own personal sin, as the biggest dividing point between them and God, then there's a strong chance that they don't understand what the gospel is, and the gospel is always of first importance. So if someone does not see that what Christ did on the cross was important for their salvation, it was necessary for their salvation, and there's a strong chance that maybe they haven't been taught, or maybe they have and they've just not thought about it. These are all possibilities, but there's a strong chance that they are not a Christian if they think that sin is simply, just messing up. Like, oh, I mess up once in a while, but I'm not a bad person. Just to, so to speak. They
Right.
don't see the seriousness of sin.
Okay. So if a person fundamentally doesn't see the seriousness of sin in the way that you mean, then is it fair to say they are not a Christian?
In the way that I mean, because so it's different degrees of people. Again, it feels like I'm just for the benefit of the listener. I'm not playing this yes or no checkbox thing where I have a
Well,
like I have like a
I'm
well
trying to
again
understand you.
I'm trying to explain, right? I'm trying to explain that you're trying to put yes or no, and I'm not thinking of it like that. I'm just saying in general terms, there's a strong chance if someone believes something that is wrong, and I don't think people want to go around believing wrong things. I don't think people are like, okay, I lots of people I've met say I want to know what's true. And if I encounter a Christian who says this, and then we talk about it, and they still insist that their view is correct, then okay, fine, go in peace. But I just don't think it would be helpful for someone to have a low view of sin, because by having a low view of sin, they're like also having a low view of the cross, and
Okay, so
and that's not helpful for them.
I get that, and I'm trying to look. Um I my entire exercise is to try to define and identify Christianity as, since I'm talking to you, as you understand it.
Right.
So, and not to strawman it. So, if a person has what you call a low view of sin, I understand what you mean by that. So let's just
I
assume
hope.
that I understand what you mean by that. Um, I understand the term. If a person has a low view of sin, they know that there are other views of sin that they reject, but theirs is the low view of sin, and that's what they hang on to. I'm trying to determine whether you think that person is a Christian or not.
And my answer is it's not yes or no. Like
So they
again,
could be a Christian and still hold a low view to sin.
yes, because at
Okay.
the moment it's not based on like a low view of sin is someone doesn't think there's anything wrong with them. But here's the thing, I can't make that judgment on them and say you're for sure not a Christian, because then that's me discerning their heart in terms of peering behind the curtain,
Okay.
something that
So
I
these last,
um, what?
I'm sorry, something happened with the audio there. I'm hearing, I heard an echo there briefly. So sorry about that. These last two things, salvation
Okay.
and sin, you have said, um, you think there's a strong chance they may not be a Christian, but you accept that there could be where they could be. But with the first
Right,
one
and
on
that and
Jesus,
that
but
that
hang up with the
window.
first one of Jesus exclusivity, you were it was a pretty strong no. They're not a Christian if they don't believe Jesus is the only way. Is that an accurate summary?
Again, I just want the biggest desire I have out of this conversation, if not for anyone else, but also for you, is to not look at Christianity as a checklist where you're checking off, you're judging, you're putting people literally in a box where you're saying this and this and this. Because what I'm saying involves having conversations with people and seeing where their heart is. And so if someone says something that is not according to what is found in Christ's teachings about salvation, my hope for them, my desire for them is that they would have a correct view. Now, there's this minimalist view where it's like, no, can I have false ideas and still be safe? How many false ideas can I have? How many false beliefs can I still keep control of my life, of my faults? Can I keep control of these things? Like, what's the bare minimum? And I'm saying to be a Christian isn't to bare minimum it. It's not like what's the minimal I can do to squeak by, and like that's the wrong mindset to have. It's
Okay,
not
but
just like, okay,
if
let me
we're
just
going to call
get there
some people
severe.
Christians and say some people aren't Christians, we got to have some kind of bare minimum understanding of it, because
But
otherwise you
you,
can never say that a person is not a Christian.
but you yourself have been arguing against that. So every time I bring up Unitarianism and I say, okay, this is what they say they believe, you're saying no. Well,
Right,
most of them don't even know about it.
right. But
So it's like
but
it's only like
I'm
you're
trying to
making it its
understand.
convenience
I'm
when
trying to
it's bad.
understand your belief. You believe that there are some propositional truths. I know I've been paying attention. I've been reading and rereading, listening and re-listening to what you're saying. You believe that there is a line, a hard line between Christian and not Christian, and I
Yes.
am just trying to figure out where that is.
Okay,
Am I
and I'm
doing
explaining
something?
it to
Am
you.
I doing something
No,
wrong in my approach to figuring it out? Help
no,
me figure
I'm.
it out.
It's that when I say something. So, for example, when I was talking about the Unitarian thing, you're like, "Well, what about the SBC?" And it's like, okay, it's like you've already found a counter to what I'm saying. So when I say, okay, someone can have false beliefs and still be a Christian, you're like, okay, which false beliefs can they have? And
Yes,
and and I'm telling you, like there's the very important beliefs that like believing that Christ is the only means of salvation, believing that you cannot be saved by any other way. That's a primary. You can't say you're a Christian if you don't believe that.
got it.
Uh, and you
Can
can't say I'm a Unitarian and I'm also a Christian because there's no way you can either like you can't serve two masters like Jesus said.
right.
You can't
So
you can't have it be one way and then the other way. You have
can
to pick one.
can you hit me with one or two other primaries that without this you're not a Christian?
All right. So first one is you have to believe that Jesus is the way to salvation.
Yeah, I got
Second,
that.
you have to see yourself. Second, you have to see yourself as a sinner in need of salvation.
Okay,
And
got
third,
it.
you have to surrender your will to God. And like this is not a comprehensive list,
I
but this is
understand.
pretty much yeah. But could I finish without interjection?
I'm just agreeing with you actively.
Yeah, but you know
I,
how
I'm actively listening
it's
to what you're
distracting,
saying.
right? It's kind of
Okay,
distracting. So.
so you have to surrender your will to God. Go ahead.
Without interjection, okay, sure. Surrender your will to God, and most importantly, you have to see it that it's an act of grace. You can't see salvation as something that you earn or something that you're owed. Like you have to grasp the grace of God in the sense of that it that if God were to give me what I deserved, that would be justice. Lots of people when they deconvert, they always say, "Well, you know, I thought God was like this, but now I see He's like this." And most of the time, it's because uh, they believe that God owed them something while they were like, you know, like I did all these things for you. I went to church 3 times a week. I was a minister. I was a missionary. I did this. I did that. And it's like all those things are not the basis for salvation. They're not the foundation. Going to church 3 times a week is not what earns you heaven, because in and of itself that act in and of itself cannot be the foundation. Because what happens if you're not able to go to church anymore? Does that mean that you stop believing in God? But for some people who make that their foundation, going to church becomes that. Or people who say, well, I just want to know if I just want a feeling in my heart that God is real. And what happens when you don't get that feeling? This is like the psalmist David is always writing about times when he feels God's presence strongly in his life, and then other psalms he's writing about how he doesn't feel. But David didn't become an atheist, but people base their knowledge of God based on how they're feeling. So what happens when you're going through those seasons? It goes away. Or what about when people are part of a church community and the church community fails them. Either people start saying bad things about you, or they just do something that is wrong objectively, and it's like, okay, those Christians treated me really badly, so now I hate all Christians, or they're all jerks, or something like that. If you make that your basis, then that basis can be taken away in a flash. But if you make Christ the basis of your faith, that can never be taken away, because Christ is objectively the same yesterday and today and forever. So when you trust in him, it's not like it can change tomorrow, because you've made him the foundation of your faith.
Okay,
And that
I need
is
to
what it means to be a
I
Christian.
need to ask clarifying questions here. So I'm going to have to interject because I can't hold that much in my head at one time when I need you to clarify something. So I ask specifically for other things like the first one that are primary doctrines without which you're not a Christian. And you mentioned surrendering your will to God, and you also mentioned grace. These feel like separate things to me. So the doctrine of grace, I know, is a doctrine that many Christians over the centuries have disagreed on, sometimes violently. Um, are you saying that the correct doctrine of grace, is essential? Because there are plenty of people who, for instance, as you say, believe that part of their salvation is based on doing good works. So if a person believes that, at least in part, their salvation is based on them doing good works, does that disqualify them from being a Christian, or does that just make them wrong about something?
Salvation is entirely based on what Christ did. So if you're mixing in your works in that, then you're not a Christian. And I never said having the right doctrine. It's possible for someone to, in practice, put like depend on Christ for salvation in practice, without in their head having to be able to articulate, like intellectualize, or just put it out there in a way that someone can read it in a book or something, and still be a Christian. This is why there's a judgment day. It's not that Mac can go around judging people based on like what I can't look into anyone's heart and see really what they're putting as number one in their heart. All I can say is this: that salvation is solely by the grace of God. And so if someone is mixing in their works with Christ's righteousness, then they're imperfect works, actually. Because if you're trying to earn a right standing with God with your works, then you are taking away. By adding, you are subtracting from what Christ
I
accomplished.
understand that.
Because
I'm not asking for.
I don't think you do,
No, I
because
do. I'm not asking for
I'm
clarification on the doctrine of grace. I understand.
I'm
I
giving the answer,
understand.
but you're cutting me off. Okay.
Okay, well, you're not answering the question I'm asking. So,
I am answering the
okay, so
question. I'm saying someone can't say that and be a Christian. That's
okay.
what I said. And then I'm clarifying it. And you're saying, no, stop clarifying. That's all I needed. Well, okay. I mean, it's not black and white. It's not a simple case of saying, okay, you believe, because people are, I mean, I hope we would agree on this. People are complicated. People come from all sorts of backgrounds. People hear all sorts of things. People have been influenced by all sorts of ideas and beliefs. And so, uh, if we're trying to get to what a person really believes, then we'd have to have a conversation. We'd have to ask them. That's why it's
Right.
important
So
to study the Bible.
this assumes that, let's say you've had the conversation. The people are listening. I know that there are Christians listening right now who may not agree with you on the doctrine of
I don't
grace.
think so.
No, well, maybe not this second, but when they hear this, they are. The audience is actually diverse.
If they are, they won't
So
say anything, but that's okay. All right.
so people are listening to this and who have a different view of grace than you do. They've heard your definition and your argument for it, and they're saying, "No, I believe you're wrong." You're saying that because they reject the argument that you're making and that they maintain that salvation is at least partially based on works that they do, that they're not Christian.
Two things. I never said that if someone does not see things exactly as I do, that they are not a Christian. That's I'm just gonna say that. Maybe I'll repeat it a few times because last week also you were not understanding what I was saying. What I'm saying is that like you are asking me, right? And
Yes.
I'm telling you, right? This is a one-to-one conversation. So when you involve other people, other hypothetical people out there who are listening and they say, well, I don't agree. Like I'm aware, it's just I'm aware that there are people who have a different view. But here's the thing, it's not up to me to look into someone's heart and say, well, just because, just look into someone who says, like, if someone says, I'm a Christian and I believe in Christ for salvation, like, I can't go to heaven without Christ. I mean, that's what they're saying. And I can't be like, no, you're not, because you don't say it the way I say it. But you're, in a way, trying to get me to say that if someone doesn't, like, it's a catch 22 where I have to, um, cut off my nose to spite my face, in the sense of, if I say this is what Christianity teaches, you are always going to come back at me with, but those people don't say that. But those, and I generally don't know how you want me to respond to that, because like we would be here all day if I had to go into like all the people who've ever said, well, I don't see it that way. What I'm interested in is right now, this conversation that's happening between you and me, where I'm saying salvation is by grace alone through faith in Christ alone.
Right.
So
And
if you're
so
basing your
you
salvation on anything else, you
you
are not a Christian. That's what I'm
you
saying.
seem to be offended that I'm trying to get your opinion on what
No,
real Christianity is. So this
I'm
is
not offended.
then maybe you're not
I'm a
listening
little
hard
bit
enough
I'm
because
a little bit peeved because you're trying to bring in other people who are not even part, like right
I am
now,
giving examples
they are
so
not.
that you can explain your view against the example I give, and that helps me understand your view. And so
Okay,
the
but
people that I am talking about, who are actual real people who see grace differently than you do, and who believe that their works are also necessary for them to be saved, I am asking, does that then, in your view, disqualify them from being a Christian?
yes, I just said that,
Okay.
right? I said it,
I
and
bet I'm
you
not the
didn't
only
want
one
to
who
listen to me.
I mean I hear yes, no, and condition of the heart. And that's what I hear with pretty much every answer. So
No, because you're trying to make it, again, you're trying to make it linear and two-dimensional, and I'm saying, okay, when if you like, here's the thing, if you want me to answer these questions in a sense of like yes, no, we could just do it rapid fire right now, and then that's it, end the show. But that's not what you want, right? You want more
well actually that is what I want because I
explanation.
want clarity.
You want,
I
yeah,
want
you want
clarity
clarity,
on
but you
what you
want it in the
believe.
sense of yes and no answers, and I'm saying, okay, that's not going to give you the clarity you're looking
If
for.
an answer can be answered in a yes or no fashion, do that. If it can't
That's
be, then clarify.
that's that's what I'm doing when I give an answer, and you're like, well, I didn't hear yes
Okay.
or no.
Well,
But
what I'm
here's the
hearing
thing.
with pretty much every question, except for the first one and possibly this one, is yes, no, and condition of the heart. Now you keep bringing up condition of the heart, um, and that's something that there was some discussion about on the board the last week that I brought up, and it seems like when I bring it up, it's wrong, and when you bring it up, it's right. Um, and
Because you're not a Christian. Okay.
what you're saying what you are saying is basically the same thing as what I was saying, which is even within the realm of Christianity, you cannot say whether a person is a Christian or not because you don't know the condition of the heart. And here you are saying you cannot answer these questions yes or no because you do not know the condition of the heart.
That's
Um,
all I'm saying.
so
Just okay, just for the next 3 minutes, listen to what I'm saying, please. Forget everything. Okay, just listen to the next what I'm gonna say for the next 3 minutes. If you're gonna take anything I say and later on put it in a comment, take this. What I'm saying is this: there are doctrines that you have to believe in order to be a Christian. You have to believe these things in order to say that I am a Christian. Now, the problem arises when people say I am a Christian, but they don't believe in these doctrines. Them saying I am a Christian nullifies it's like faith without works is dead. You can't say I have faith and have no works. And in the same way, you can't say I am a Christian but not believe the things that make Christianity Christianity. Uh, the things that make Christianity Christianity is that it's entirely by the grace of God. It's Jesus is the only way to heaven. Uh, and like I'm blanking out, but there's other things that just hold that make it unique to everything else that the world has to say. Now, if your objection is, well, there are people who believe who believe these things but have other understandings, and I'll say yes, correct. There are people who do believe these things, but I am not quick, right? I am not quick to tell someone who is a Christian and who shows that they believe at least that Jesus is the way to salvation and that only through him can their sins be forgiven, can they be reconciled to God. I am not quick to dismiss someone who has different beliefs to me compared to about, like, let's say, role of women, right, baptism, about all these things that you sent me a few minutes ago. I'm not quick to tell that person you are not a Christian, right? I'm not quick to say it. So there's a triage going on. There's essential doctrines, and then there's other doctrines which help us to live as a community better. So I wouldn't be able to go to a church and live peaceably in a community with other Christians if those Christians believe that, like, you have to ordain women to be pastors because that's where we are in our culture, and Paul got it wrong. Like, I wouldn't be able to be part of that church. Now, I can't say to those people that means you don't believe the gospel, because those two things are mutually exclusive to one another. They're not the same thing. But what I'm hearing from you is that, okay, you all have to you all have to be the same exact you have to look the exact same way. But when we do that, we are a cult. When we don't do that, then we don't agree. So my solution is this: when and I'm going to stop after this, is that when I look at a family, I see brothers and sisters. I can look at a brother and I can look at a sister. I can look at another brother and I can see that, yes, they're related. They're related. They have DNA from their mother and their father, but they're not identical twins, but they're still siblings. That is how Christians are able to relate with one another across denominations. We don't all look the same, but we have the same spiritual DNA. Now, if you're asking me, like, okay, how do you know you have the same spiritual DNA? I would say, well, that's for God to determine on the final day. He's gonna judge everyone. He's gonna say to some, away from me, I never knew you. And he's going to say to others, welcome to the kingdom that was prepared before the foundations of the earth. He's going to do that. The spiritual DNA part is God's job. It's not my job. For me, I can only look at external things, what people say that they believe, and say, okay, if you say you don't believe that Jesus is the only way, then you are not a Christian. That's all I can say. I can only look at the outward things, and that's the best I can do. I can't give you what you're asking me. I can't do the spiritual DNA thing, because that's God's realm. That's his job. I can't fill that job description. That's all I'm saying.
Right. So what I began asking you was, what are the things that make a person a Christian, and by extension, the things that they could believe that don't make them a Christian? And you have been so busy trying to avoid what you think is a trap that the answers have just been confusing. It's not it's a pretty straightforward question. We both acknowledge that you believe that some things would make a person a Christian, some things wouldn't. We also believe, as I mentioned in posts last week, that there is a condition of the heart that no one can judge except God. So, setting that aside, we can look at the propositions, the externals, and discuss them. And that's what I have been trying my best to do. Let's see. With just a couple of more minutes, we have on the sheet that I sent you, toward the bottom of that. I'm interested in maybe just a little bit of color on specific behaviors and beliefs, because Christianity is not necessarily about what you do, and yet what you do is a reflection of who you are and maybe what you are, and whether or not you are being actively regenerated or not. So you see Christians doing things and saying things, and it makes people who are not Christians say, well, if that's Christianity, I don't want any part of it. Or, if you represent Christianity, then I like my side better. So how does one's personal behavior fit into their claim of being a Christian? They're a Christian, but they are also a sex worker, drug addict, active homosexual, racist, and they're stingy with money. Does any of that factor into whether they are a Christian or not? I do not hear you. I know that you are there, but for whatever reason, I do not hear you. Okay, so I'm not sure.
All right. Okay. Am I
There
back?
you are. Yeah, you're back.
All right.
Did
All
you
right.
did you hear
So
the question that I asked?
yeah, I'm just curious. Like
Okay.
when you picked out these issues, was there a reason that you picked out specifically these sins
They're things that Christians talk about a lot.
in
So,
like in America? But I would say that Christianity is not Amerocentric. I would say that if
okay,
someone
but
is
you
a
asked you
Christian,
asked me if there was a reason I picked these out. I mean, would you like me to pick out a different set of
no, I
five?
was just because you said because it's what people
Okay,
talk about, and
so
I'm like,
these
okay,
are
okay,
things that
you mentioned.
everybody knows what it is in the news. This is Christians talk about it, and so they seem to make sense. Would you mind addressing the question that I ask? If it's the wrong question,
No,
what's the right question?
I'm always
Okay,
trying to answer your questions, David. It's just that sometimes when I start answering, you're like, well, you're not answering. Um, uh, I don't know what to make of this list because again, I don't know because I know you don't take some of them to be sins. Uh, so I don't understand how to answer it because if
okay.
someone
I
doesn't think
personally, I
that
personally
being
don't take any of it to be sins, but if I'm wearing my Christian hat and I'm
well,
just
you don't have to
looking
wear your
at
Christian
what
hat.
I'm looking, okay, so if I'm just looking at the literature to see what within that context would be considered sins, all of these would be considered sins. So
But none of
they
them
are.
are sins. Like being a racist
Well,
is not a sin.
I don't believe in God, so I don't believe in your formulation of sin. I'm not sure what you're asking me now. So
Okay,
I
but
believe
you
that
have
I've.
to have a common understanding of what sin is. When you say I don't believe in
Okay,
God,
but
but then me answering the question,
that's why I said wearing my Christian hat, all of these would be sins. Is that a wrong thing to say?
it's
Are
not a
all of
wrong
these
thing to
are all of
say.
these not things not sins?
That's not what
Because
I'm
if they
saying.
are, okay, then could you address the question that I asked?
I'm getting to it. I'm getting to it. It's just that I also have to ask clarifying questions as you do because I don't want to give an answer that ends up avoiding what you're saying. So looking at this list, it's like if you say, okay, I don't believe that any of these are like sin even exists or God exists, but like to answer this question, if someone is a Christian and they still struggle with these sins, then struggling with a sin does not nullify because part of being a Christian is confessing your sin to God daily and asking Him for help to reform you to be the kind of person who loves Him and loves neighbor as you love yourself. So if someone is any of these things, now there's a difference. If someone is struggling with sex addiction, drug addiction, and all these other things, greed, racism, homosexuality, if someone is struggling with them and they confess to God that they need help with them, then I can't say, well, because you're struggling with this particular sin, then that means you're not a Christian. I can't say that.
How do you
So is
define
that the answer you're
struggling?
looking for?
Well,
Struggling
maybe.
means you're trying, you see that it's wrong,
Okay.
but you find yourself giving into you find yourself doing that. So someone in America, for example, who loves money, right? They have lots of money,
Hmm.
and for them, the biggest struggle is helping the poor. Uh, Jonathan Edwards he wrote a sermon about how helping the poor isn't just about giving what you have, but like rather sacrificially giving something. So if your neighbor is struggling and you have $100 and you need $25 to buy something you really want, but you give it to your neighbor, then that's you helping the poor. It's not that you have $1,000 and then you give $25. In a sense, you've helped them, but you've not really sacrificially helped them. Now, for greed, it will be something like someone in their heart can tell that they're not a very welcoming person, and they see it's wrong, and they are asking God for help. They're being discipled in their church, they're getting all the help that they can. Then I can say that that person is not a Christian. Now if someone is greedy and they say, well, this money is all mine, I don't think I ever need to have to help anyone because I worked hard for this, then that person in a very real sense has not grasped the essence of the gospel. And where it gets a bit uh, muddy in terms of practical things is that everyone struggles with sin in some form, and so it's whether you're aware of it and you're confessing it to God, and not that you're just okay with it, like you're saying this is a good thing, the way some people say with racism or addiction, like yes, I'm a Christian, but every day I'm at the strip club, you know, blowing all my money. It's two things that are inconsistent. You can't habitually be sinning and at the same time tell people that you're a Christian. That's what it says in First John, where it says, if anyone says, uh, "I know him," but does not keep the commandments, he's a liar, and there's no truth in him. So the gospel informs how you live your life too, and part of living that life involves faith and involves daily repentance. It's not merely uh it's not merely like, okay, I guess I'm these things, God, you're gonna have to deal with me the way you want to deal with me.
Okay. So you use the word struggle a lot, and I understand what you mean by that. But what about a person who, looks at anything on this list and doesn't struggle with it, who just thinks that they are right? Like, for instance, someone who is a homosexual who's not trying to be not a homosexual because they find that homosexuality, there's nothing wrong with it. And so they're an active homosexual, but also declare themselves to be a Christian. With this behavior and this belief about this behavior, disqualify them in your mind from being a Christian.
If they were an active racist, would it disqualify them for you?
Uh, uh, I don't know. Probably would
Okay.
would be my answer. But I don't know, because honestly, there were people in the Bible who were pretty rough and tumble and were not it at all what I would consider good people that God considered friends and in His good graces. So I don't know what God sees as behavior that's okay and behavior that's not. Even if you can point out that a certain behavior is a sin, uh, I don't, I don't know that there are a lot of examples in the Bible where this behavior disqualified someone from something. I don't. So I would say I would have trouble answering that question, but I would hope that you have a better answer than that. Because when I
Mm.
was a Christian, I knew many homosexuals because there are many homosexuals in conservative churches. Um, and that's just a fact. But that said, um, and they weren't struggling with anything. So did I think they were Christians? Um, I did not let my personal thoughts about that influence how I treated them in fellowship. So I tried very hard, at least at some point in my Christianity, not to worry about whether this person is or isn't a Christian. So some of this would be very hard for me to answer personally, even with my Christian hat on. But you are not me. And so I expect your answer to be very different from mine. So I put the question to you again. If there are people who have behaviors such as these, this is just a list of 5 things. You can make any other list you want. And, you can definitively say these things are sin, but they say, yeah, well, I don't think it's a sin, and I'm just going to go ahead and continue doing it. Would that person be a Christian or not a Christian in your mind?
Based on what they say and how they live, then they're not a Christian, because a Christian is someone who, when they recognize sin in their life, they work to, by the grace of God, mortify it. They work to ask God to help them. So if someone is embracing, it's like the whole controversy with, okay, can, so if someone was like a sex trafficker, but like there's this huge fad in the 90s, where rappers would wear crosses around their necks, and they would say that hey, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus, but what they're singing about, what they're rapping about, what they're promoting is not it's not Jesus. They're promoting worldliness, they're promoting sex and all other things. And so if we were to take that as a template for someone who says, yeah, you can't take someone like Jesus, who said he is the Lord of heavens and the earth, and just put him off to the side and say, like, I'm only going to serve you if you help me really get to how I really want to feel. Because with a God, like a deity like that, it's all or nothing. And that's what he said. He said, if you want to be my disciple, you have to be ready to pick up your cross daily and follow me. And that involves putting death, what is earthly, in you. And these sins, there's lots of sins that people struggle with. Some of them are even more subtle than others. There's self-righteousness, thinking that you're better than other people because of something, or if someone just has their identity as being self-righteous, or all these other identities that come before Christ, then they're not a Christian. And again, like my template, my framework of going off this when talking to Christians is like, do the words that Jesus says in Matthew 7 about saying, he'll say to some people, depart from me, I never knew you. Do those words make you feel afraid? Because there's a sense in which you can have the right doctrine, right? Like I said in the past, the devil has more theologically accurate thoughts about God than everyone else, but the devil hates God. The devil has not submitted his will to God. The devil wants nothing to do with God, and so the devil remains damned. And so there are Christians who have theologically accurate thoughts about God, but they have not submitted their wills to God, and in a sense, they hate God. Like Martin Luther, before he became a Christian, he said he hated God because he thought God was vindictive and hateful. And so he just had this idea of God that was completely it's just God is just a tyrant. And in a sense, people who still cling on to their earthly identities, like hey, I can't do this, I'm an addict, like this is how I was raised like this, even as a result of other people's sin. These people are in a sense still in danger of falling into the trap of looking to themselves for salvation, looking to themselves for help. But the call of the gospel, again, is to look to Christ alone for salvation, not to look to yourself, not to look to your earthly identity, because all these things will fade away. And so if someone is embracing sin actively, then no, they are not a Christian.
Okay.
But if they recognize the sin and they're asking God to help them live better for Christ because of what he did,
Yeah.
then they are a Christian.
Let me jump in. I know that the hard stop is coming. One of the things that you said that I took note of in the earlier section was about surrendering your will to God, and I wanted to separate that out. I might write something about that this week, because I actually think that's the big one that didn't get discussed properly, and we're not going to have time to discuss it now. But one of the things that I used to say when I was a Christian, especially a fairly conservative Christian, but I think it's pretty consistent throughout my Christianity, is with the example of the rich man who, when Jesus said, "Sell everything you've got," he goes away sorrowful. And Christians like to walk away from that or distance themselves from it or pretend like, oh, well, good thing that doesn't apply to us today. Haha. But the thing that I would say about that is, if you know in your heart that you wouldn't give up everything you have, literally, if Jesus asked you to do it, then you're not a Christian either. You're not in the same boat as this person. Now, I actually think that it's stronger than that and worse than that, but just minimally, if you understand that you're the kind of person who would never, under any circumstances, sell all you have and give the money to the poor, you're not a Christian. I don't care what else you say, because you have not surrendered your will to God. And so, just curious if you would see it the same way, or would you see it as, well, people, we're all sinful, and we there's always something that we're not going to do right, and the grace of God covers it. So are you in the camp of the grace of God covers it, or are you in the camp of you are openly and knowingly unwilling to do what God asks you to do, depending on what it is? What camp are you in? In fact, that was kind of the source of the Abraham test, back in the day. It was, would you do what God said even if it came down to this, or would you draw the line? And if there's any place where you would draw the line, then for me, you're not really a Christian.
So, three things I just want to point out. First, starting in reverse order, I think the Abraham Isaac situation is just meant to give us a picture of what God did with Christ on the cross. It's not mainly supposed to say it's all about. Well, I can't expand it out because I'm running out of time.
Yep.
Can't expand out how it's not merely just about unfettered obedience. It was a picture of the gospel beforehand. So you're saying if someone does not want to give up something in their life, then they're not a Christian. And I would say, like, if they have understood Christianity correctly, then they would want to give it up. Yes, if they have understood it correctly. And later on in that same passage, when the disciples see that the rich man is sent away, like he's not sent away, he goes away sorrowful, and Peter says, but we've given up everything to follow you. And Jesus says, like, anyone who's given up lands or families, they will get it back 100-fold. And in a sense, it's that you're not just giving it up and it's just gone, in the sense of like, wow, God is just taking this away, but rather it's God himself saying that I should be I am the most valuable being in the universe, and why would you cling to temporary things? So like, if that rich man took a time machine to today with all his wealth, he would probably be really poor because his currency, whatever he had, is not currency today anymore. And and the big thing there is that yes, you should be able to give up what it is that you hold to be the most dear, because God is the one who gave you that thing. God is the giver, and your affection should be geared towards the giver and not the gift instead. And so if someone is having a hard time saying, I can't, like, I only sought out this Christianity thing so I can feel a little bit better about myself, and you're saying that I have to repent of this sin, you're saying I can't live with my girlfriend anymore, well, I can't do that, so I don't think
Yeah.
this is for me.
Well, and
And then you'd have to say, like, yeah, you have to pick and choose. You can't say it's I can't say it's both.
you got 5 minutes. I just wanted to clarify and add to, you can toss out the Abraham test if you like, but there's still other things in the Bible. Like, for instance, if your child or wife or best friend comes and suggests you worship other gods, don't listen to anything else they have to say. Be the first to smash them on the head, and let the community join in murdering them. Okay, so you could, so that could be a thing, and you could say, I'm drawing the line there. I wouldn't do that. I simply wouldn't. Even if God told me to smash the head of my wife after she had done something bad, even though He's not telling us to do that sort of thing today, I wouldn't do it if He did. And I know that one of the turning points for me, I don't know if it was, but there was a time when I would have said about selling everything I had, yes, I would absolutely do it, and I meant it. And then there was a later time when, looking at that same thing, I realized if Jesus came and said, sell everything you have, I would say that He was a ridiculous cult leader and walk away. There's no way I would do it. And so I
Right.
recognize the difference in orientation there. And I'm just saying, wherever your line is, because the Bible has plenty of places where God told people to do things that we consider awful things. If you draw the line at any of those places with your modern sensibilities, then you haven't surrendered your will to God. And that's the only point that I was making there.
Right. And for lots of people, like with the rich man, it was his riches. Like, he wasn't a bad man; he was a moral man. He was like, I do all these things, but Jesus said, you lack one thing, and He put His finger on the thing that this person loved the most, and that was his riches. He could not part with his riches. He could not give it up and get God, which shows the state of the sinful heart, which is like a fire, like no fire ever says, okay, that's enough fuel. The more a fire grows, the more it wants to consume. And so the sinful heart in itself also has more desires, the more it's growing in its intensity. And in the same way, God is saying, okay, there's good things on this earth that are made for you to enjoy. But when you turn good things into ultimate things, then they become idols, and then you can't give them up. You pick them over against God, and that's the irrationality of sin. It makes you make the worst trade of all. You pick temporal things, and you say no to God. You say no to Jesus because you love your riches more, and you can substitute riches for whatever it is:
Right.
comfort, sex, power, money,
Right.
all these other things. And that's the essence of sin. Sin is a power. It's a corrupting power. It's an enslaving power. It just shrivels you up, and it has no lasting satisfaction.
So let's go ahead and cut it off here, because once again I know you've got to go. And so I want to do one more week of this, but what I want to do is collect comments and questions from the board, and then come back and talk about them, and see if we can bring some clarification and, if not closure, at least a better understanding of what this thing of Christianity is, because we all talk about Christianity, and to some degree we're all talking past each other. And I want to give a chance for people who are listening to come into the conversation, as it were. So, find the webpage, skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com, log in your Discuss account, discuss away, leave your questions and or comments, and so that Mac and I can pick them up and maybe talk about them next week. And the other clarifying thing I want to say is, if it sounds like I am annoyed with this conversation, it's not true. I actually have enjoyed this conversation. I'm just sick. I've been sick for a little bit. I am sick as a dog, and when this is over, I'm going to find a pot to puke in, and then I'm going to start editing this thing. But that's what's going on with me. Wouldn't overly read too much into that. It's one of the reasons I have the camera off this week, because I don't want to be reading things into my mannerisms and facial expressions. I'm in a lot of pain, and I'm sick because medicine. So that said, I think that's good. I don't need a closing statement. We'll make good.
I think a good closing statement, because generally people are like, okay, can you just like summarize what you just said? And I think some people love summaries, some people don't. But for the sake of the people who love summaries, the essence of what I'm saying is, someone is a Christian if they have a relationship with God. Now, that's a cliche term that you hear it a lot, so many times, that it kind of loses its impact. But that's what it means to be a Christian. You have a relationship with God. You're looking to Christ for salvation. You're relying on the Holy Spirit for sustenance, and you're part of a church community in which they help you and you help them do this. And so a lot of things can get lost in communication. But like one thing that maybe if someone wants to think about this is that the presence of orthodox beliefs, of emotional gratification and social reform does not demonstrate that you're a Christian. So if you see someone that is doing all these things as orthodox, that doesn't necessarily mean they're a Christian. And what I mean by this is, I'll close with the parable that Jesus gave about the two people who built houses. One of them built their house on the rock, and the other just built their house. And when the waves came and the storms came, the one whose house was built on the sand, it got swept away, and that's because it had no foundation. The two houses looked the same on the outside, but underneath the foundation was different. And a Christian is someone who has Christ as the foundation of their faith. They don't have their orthodox beliefs, they don't have their emotional gratification, they don't have their social involvement. They have Christ, because when the storms of life come, and they always come, and let's say you're a pastor or something, and you're in a church, and people come in and they ruin the entire dynamic, and you get swept away, and that church gets taken away from you, you get fired or something, whatever, then that's gone. And most people who deconvert, they say, that's what happened. I was a pastor and these Christians treated me awfully and I'm done. And other people say, like I was going through a hard season in my life, and just God didn't feel like God was near, and now I'm an atheist. Now it's gone. It's like, it's more complicated than that. But people put their foundation on anything that is not Christ. But if you put your foundation in Christ, you find that Christ is not the rock that can get swept away by anything, because he took the wrath that was due to sinners and he bore it, and he came out on the other side. And whoever believes in him, whoever trusts in this solid rock, will not be put to shame. And that's what it means to be a Christian. And everything else flows from that. You put your trust in Christ, everything flows from that. Right doctrines, right beliefs, right practice, right understanding of the world, and not just how you live your life, but how you see everything else in life. That's what it means to be a Christian. It's not simply a checklist. It's more. It's about putting Christ as your foundation.
Okay, relationship with God, we might start there next week, and we'll close it out at that point. So until next time, we'll see you in the comments. Please drop your questions and contributions for next week's show, and in the meantime, we're out.